English translation 403rd contact. Sunday, 6th of November 2005, 23:03 hours.
It is very convenient for me that Eve has gone over to the apartment, which is why I take the opportunity to come here at this time. Greetings, Edward.
Welcome, Ptaah. I did not know you were in the area today, as we had to cancel our correction work yesterday because I was at my grandchild Jennifer's in Newkirch, Egnoch at Lake Constance. But look right here. This article that I published in September in Bulletin 53, you know it. I received several telephone calls about it, including from the USA. They were very positive reactions to what I wrote. 2 of the 4 American callers complained that their President George W. Bush was the last bullshit and that this guy should be banished. All 4 callers said that they knew nothing of what I had revealed, and that this was probably true of the majority of Americans, who certainly had no idea of all the atrocious machinations of the government, the U.S. military, and the secret services. And what my article says about the secret U.S. torture prisons around the world is now being discussed again in Switzerland. As you can see here from these 2 articles in the newspaper Der Landbote and the free newspaper 20 Minuten. These coincide with the article U.S. Torture Jets that was attached to my bulletin article.
It was a necessity for me to visit you because I felt like having a private conversation with you after being in northern Pakistan. It is very interesting that so shortly after the publication of your bulletin number 53 on the internet, now again the talk is coming out publicly about these catastrophic machinations of the USA. From this it is clearly evident that everything you publish is also read by newspaper makers and politicians worldwide. But we have known about this for a long time. Even if it is always concealed that your frank words in the bulletins are very often the impetus for things to be made known in the media that the newspaper makers and politicians, etc., would otherwise not dare to talk about openly. It is clear from this that time and again cowardly kowtowing is in effect, and courage is only summoned when others dare to speak openly, like you. But let us see what the newspapers have written. Your article there, I know about it, but I think it would be appropriate for you to attach it to our conversation. Because not all readers of our contact conversations have access to the internet, and not all of them receive the bulletins, as I know. So it should be so that they can read everything in the contact conversation volumes.
The USA should clean up their own mess on their own doorstep.
What is said below, and this must be clear, is not directed against the righteous Americans who, as U.S. citizens, disagree with the U.S. governmental and political, economic, intelligence, and military machinations, and who are disregarded and oppressed as a minority by the leaders of the state and pro-government sects, intelligence agencies, security agencies, economic powers, and military and mercenary forces, etc. As we have known, for more than a century, the USA has been acting as a moral authority in relation to the whole world. But American morality stinks to high heaven and leaves practically everything good, honorable, valuable, peaceful, free, and altogether humane to be desired, to the last iota. The USA shouts loudly about security and peace for humanity, but at the same time it treats the fundamental human rights as criminally as possible at its whim. Through intelligence, mercenary troops, and the military, the USA sneaks into or invades foreign states and spreads war, revolution, murder, manslaughter, crime, destruction, fear, torture, terror, and economic terror. It is not to the liking of the USA that the truth about its death penalty legislation, its erroneous jurisprudence in general, and its worldwide crimes and human rights violations is spread through about it, no matter from which side it is uncovered. It does not suit the U.S. at all that its worldwide criminal, felonious, and degenerate world domination work is being exposed and denounced around the globe, and that they vehemently deny that they are acting as a moral authority and that they are undermining the international system of human rights and pushing it into the mud, this is a fact that can only be denied by erroneous ones and those dim of consciousness. And indeed, it is more than just a farce and the height of all hypocrisy, meanness and insolence to scourge and terrorize other peoples and nations for human rights violations, while the USA itself is trampling on all the fundamental rights of human beings in the mud with dirty feet. It is worth remembering that the U.S. military has invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, causing thousands of deaths and incredible destruction. But it is also worth remembering all the other places where the U.S. has spread death, destruction and doom tens of thousands of times, with Hiroshima and Nagasaki probably being the worst crimes of all recent times. It is also worth remembering all the many massacres around the world, which cost hundreds of thousands or even millions of human lives because of the U.S. military. My Lai in South Vietnam is only one case, where on the 16th of March, 1968, during the Vietnam War, more than 300 civilians, helpless women, children, and men were murdered by American soldiers, who were initially celebrated as heroes. Elsewhere, even worse atrocities were committed by the U.S. military, with thousands of civilian, helpless human beings, women, children, and men, being mercilessly massacred, something that was largely hidden from the world public, and for which the killers were never held accountable. For such crimes, the USA has always refused to allow the military killers to be brought before the International Criminal Court in The Hague and tried. And as a rule, such criminals are not brought to justice in the USA in particular. But if it does happen, because the world public cries out and demands it, then only show trials take place, in which the killing and torturing beasts are sentenced to minimal punishments, whereby it is questionable whether these punishments are then also carried out, or whether the criminals are not released after a short time. The USA disregards all international instruments with which war crimes committed by U.S. soldiers could be punished, because these felonious criminals are protected by the state and are hailed as heroes in America. Let us also think of the detention of alleged terrorists in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where the prisoners are not only humiliated to the point of blood, but are also subjected to at least psychological torture, and are caged and mistreated like wild animals without charge and without rights to humane treatment and defense. Muslims are reviled as underdogs because of their faith, with every kind of dirt being thrown in their way to spoil and stifle their rituals of faith. Tearing up, trampling and urinating all over the Koran, and throwing it to the dogs for food and other dirty actions of a similar kind are typical for the humanly depraved Guantanamo guards, who in their filthiness think of themselves as good citizens and family fathers, etc., but their real inhumanity, meanness, degeneracy, and terroristic pathological lust for power knows no bounds. Nor do the male and female prisoner abusers who are up to no good in the boot camps. The so-called toughest jails in the world, in the USA, and who maltreat and tyrannize the human beings as the ultimate filth and scum. The reports of Amnesty International are not a requirement in order to know, on my part, what the American government, judiciary, intelligence services, and military are like, because my own experiences with the dark side of America speaks their own language, and that is in line with the reports of Amnesty International. In fact, I have been out in the world long enough, and I have also seen enough bad, negative, and malicious American machinations to speak from experience in the living of it. And when the reports of Amnesty International denounce the USA in regard to its human rights and war crimes, then it really has its feet on the ground. Even if the ruling U.S.-American human rights and war criminals deny everything with words such as, from the mouth of U.S. President George W. Bush, absurd, or Vice President Dick Cheney, outraged in regard to the disclosure of U.S. war crimes, etc. Also the words of U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Whoever makes such crazy claims loses all claim to objectivity and seriousness. Obviously stink, just like Bush's absurd and Cheney's outrage, of justification in the knowledge that the revelations of Amnesty International are indeed true. When accusations of fundamental rights, human rights violations, torture, the death penalty, terrorism, unjust punishment and legislation, war crimes and inhumanity, etc. are made against other countries, U.S. America cries pro and hurrah and stamps them into the ground, especially when it comes to Islamic states, such as Iran, Syria, and Iraq, etc. But also Cuba and China and North Korea are being demonized by the U.S., and everything is included in the axis of evil of the mad U.S. president. But if something is said equally against the USA, because it corresponds to the truth and reality, then everything that can be proved is branded as untrustworthy and as a tirade of hatred against America. In reality, however, U.S. America's waistcoat is, in relation to all mentioned evils, and even more, for the most part so dirty and black that hardly any white spot is visible. Really white is only that part of the waistcoat which represents the minority of those Americans who are not involved in the aforementioned evils and machinations of the judiciary, the government, the secret services and the military, the mercenaries as well as white-collar criminals, and who are suppressed or simply made to disappear or simply silenced. It does not even take much, as various cases prove. Just take the witnesses of the UFO crash in Roswell in June 1947, as well as the witnesses of the faked alleged first moon landing of the USA on the 20th of July in 1969. Witnesses of the fraudulent machinations were not only ridiculed, portrayed as fantasists or liars, because actually some very strange things happened. And precisely with regard to the disappearance of human beings forever, America is also one of those states that trample human rights underfoot, as not only I, but also Amnesty International says. And when the sectarian U.S. president, who, together with the Pope, imagines himself as God's representative and brings roaring misery to large parts of earthly humanity through war, terror, and destruction, calls the reports of Amnesty International as absurd with the I know of the donkey in charge, loudly proclaiming, "I know the report of Amnesty International, and it is absurd. It is an absurd accusation." The United States is a country that promotes peace in the world, then these words stink to high heaven of falsehood and lies. Where, the question is the United States bringing peace to the world? Perhaps through the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, through the countless U.S. intelligence assassinations around the world, through the death penalty in the U.S., or through the threats of war made by the ruling war criminals. In fact, the truth is that the greatest terror and the worst human rights abuses in the world come from the United States, causing more strife and hatred and retaliation than any other state. And that, all over the world, the disregard for human rights is rampant, and good intentions are being kicked in the mud is the main fault of the U.S. America, which as the worst example of all bad examples is the absolute non plus ultra and is without equal. When Amnesty International calls those responsible, first and foremost U.S. President Bush, Bush Vice President Cheney, and U.S. Secretary of Justice Alberto Gonzales and their associates, and all those involved in the criminal incidents in Guantanamo Bay and in Baghdad's Abu Ghraib prison, high-ranking architects of torture, then this is to put it mildly, for the dirty, primitive, and sleazy machinations of these ones, pathologically craving for might, can no longer be expressed in their wretchedness with labels. What the United States is doing in Afghanistan, Iraq and Abu Ghraib prison, and in America in the prisons and boot camps, is contrary to all international law, but that is something about which the United States does not give a damn. The fact is that the United States is also a signatory to the Geneva Convention against Torture. But what the hell? In the name of the American system of justice, the U.S. Secret Services and many military and mercenary forces are acting against it, without this pack of criminals being brought to justice. In the case of the United States, the convention is only applicable in the sense that the only way to hold Americans accountable is if they are tortured by other powers or their relatives, etc. This is despite the fact that the United States is also obliged under the Geneva Convention and under international law to prosecute and punish all torture and ill treatment and not to authorize, promote, or use it. Therefore, according to the Geneva Convention and under international law, the USA is also obliged to take punitive action against torture and other ill treatment of prisoners, opponents of war, or private individuals within its own ranks in order to hold torturers of all kinds severely accountable. But this is exactly what does not happen as a rule, because show trials are only held when the world public cries out. But not only those foot soldiers who carry out torture and trample all the basic rights of human beings underfoot must be called to account and severely punished, but also all ruling scoundrels, bandits, and murderous thugs who give orders for torture, murder, and manslaughter, or even condone it, must be called to account and punished. Truly, they are the very same unscrupulous, criminal, irresponsible, undignified, and dog-eat-dog creatures as those who carry out their orders or, on their own responsibility, torture and murder human beings without hesitation. The unquestionable truth is that American war crimes are constantly spreading and have recently eclipsed all the American war crimes of World War II, although the crimes committed in that period were already monstrous. However, the world did not care about this then. Nor does it care now, and consequently neither those responsible in the ranks of the rulers nor the direct torturers and murderers were brought to justice then, as is also the case today. On the contrary, all war crimes committed by the USA are cheered worldwide, and the responsible criminals of the government and the foot soldiers are toasted with champagne, and the war crimes are celebrated as heroism. If the war crimes and terrorism of the United States are considered carefully, they are the best instrument of propaganda that the United States could wish for in order to provoke fanatical terrorist organizations and individual terrorists, who, in turn, spread terror, murder, hardship, grief, horror, misery, and destruction, perfectly in line with the U.S. system. It is not unusual for terrorists to be trained in the USA as killers, special fighters, and guerrilla warriors, as has always been the case, just like the U.S. Secret Service and U.S. military and U.S. mercenaries. Besides the entire open terror of the USA, there are also secret acts of terror of all kinds in all imaginable states by the U.S. Secret Services. Just as the worldwide U.S. economic crime does not know any borders and has already crept into all states of the earth. Worldwide, the companies and corporations of other countries are infiltrated and Americanized by U.S. economic managers, only to finally pass into U.S. hands. And the U.S. American-friendly company owners and corporate bosses are so lowly intelligent and dim-witted that they do not see the writing on the wall, that the USA is trying to achieve world domination with all dirty means, which they are already on the way to doing through the U.S. American-friendly ones. Playing world policeman and anti-terrorist is only one thing with which the USA is casting a spell on the lowly intelligent and dim-witted ones. A specific word also needs to be said about the U.S. penal camp system. It is not only the boot camps in the USA, Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, and Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq that are inhuman places of torture, because elsewhere in the world the USA also maintains a whole network of prisons in which many human beings are roasted and kept like cattle. Not only the human rights organization Amnesty International knows this, but also the PLEARN explain this, although the responsible state powers of the USA deny everything. These are prisons such as Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, even if this is generally not known to the American people, nor is it known to the world public. Many of these torture prisons are top secret, where human beings literally disappear forever, both because they are allegedly a threat to U.S. security, because they know too much about and could reveal the U.S. state system or the secret services or the dark economies, etc. The abductees are held forever, and they are not allowed access to a lawyer, nor are they allowed a court hearing or contact with their families. Many of them are tortured. But that is not the end of the story, because defenseless human beings have also been brutally, physically, and psychologically tortured and mistreated, and also murdered in these prisons. In addition to this, the United States often kidnaps human beings in the streets of the world who it suspects of being terrorists or a threat to U.S. security, either disappearing in various states in abominable prisons maintained by the United States, as has already been described, or being deported to countries where all kinds of torture and possibly the death penalty is still commonplace. In this respect, the USA is operating worldwide with its machinations, using special aeroplanes for the rendition of the kidnapped, also in Switzerland, at least at Cointrin Airport in Geneva, to which the Swiss government is apparently deaf, because it is obviously flirting with the USA in many respects, to which one wonders what the purpose of the flirting is and why everything is done clandestinely vis-à-vis the Swiss population. But it is clear that all atrocities come to light eventually, only sometimes it takes a long time until then. But also the criminal and felonious machinations of the USA, as they were called, are now entering the public consciousness, as the Blick newspaper denounced with the adjacent articles of 17.605, and it is to be assumed with certainty that this will also continue to be the case, as the player in Ptaah explained in response to a question regarding these things. Everywhere where a country, a population, or a government is a thorn in the U.S.'s side and is not of any use for U.S. America, like among others, Cuba and Venezuela, harsh criticism is made, or U.S. Secret Service or mercenary jackboots of murder are sent into the country to organize terror, either underground or openly. If the USA finds even the slightest benefit in a country, then a relatively lenient assessment or even large-scale assistance is given. Such a country is, for example, Colombia, which probably has the worst and most terrible human rights situation in all of Latin America. But since the U.S. can obviously benefit from Colombia, it is obviously well disposed towards it. U.S. America is obviously abusing human rights for political as well as economic and military purposes in a wise that is recognizable to any rational human being, and the lowly intelligent and dim-witted ones of the world, especially certain governments of the European, Arab, and Asian world, are watching the evil goings-on and are primitive and lowly intelligent enough to reach out to the U.S. with dirty hands and wag their tails to paint the floor. Sleazy and hypocritical, friendship is drunk with the wicked, and the sleazy ones are not intelligent enough to realize that they are also addicted to wickedness. And there are some of them who even betray their own country just to be able to make greasy handshakes with the USA or the EU. And the fact is, the USA is an accumulation of lies, slander and hypocrisy, of world domination mania, governmental sectarianism, contempt for human rights and abuse of fundamental rights, as well as vindictiveness and revenge, self-importance, arrogance, racial hatred, hatred against other religions and dissenters. And since U.S. America does not want to hear this truth, all those who openly denounce all the abuses of the USA are put on the black list, and that they are trying to kill all those who have the courage to spread the truth about America and its system should be clear to every rational human being, and I should also not be exempt from this. Billy.
Yes, it is like I said. Obviously, the whole thing was taken up again because you wrote and published your article, which leaves nothing to be desired in terms of openness.
You want to talk to me privately, but would I have 2 or 3 more questions, if you do not mind going into them?
Certainly. For my part, I have my free time, so I am in no hurry.
Regarding the earthquake series in Pakistan, have you made any further clarifications today regarding the number of dead?
I would like to talk to you about that privately because I am very moved by the whole thing. The misery in the entire earthquake area is catastrophic. More than 1 million humans are ill. Especially children and elderly humans are affected by all kinds of diseases, many of whom will die. It is very distressing for me, although I have experienced many such events. And it is unfortunate that due to the correctness of our directives, we cannot intervene to help. For if we were to disregard them, then the Earth humans would become dependent on us and would again and again rely on our help alone in all kinds of events and catastrophes and would lose their own initiative to help themselves and to make the necessary progress. So our help would be counterproductive and therefore irresponsible and criminal towards earthly humankind. Furthermore, the Earth humans would demand of us that we should give all of our knowledge of medicine and technology, etc. to them. But this would lead to disaster because the earthly scientists, politicians, governments, the secret services, and the military could not deal with it, nor could the entire population.
We have talked about this many times in private, and I think, and you know this, I can fully support your handling of the directives. And I can sympathize with you that despite your old age and all your experiences, the hardship and misery in Pakistan and India moves and afflicts you. Because in me too, there is an affection for those living in hardship and misery as a result of the catastrophe. Well, but perhaps you can tell me, in spite of everything, whether you have any new data concerning the dead?
My investigations today have revealed a total number of 126,712 dead in all the areas affected by the earthquake since 8 October, when the first earthquake occurred. The exact number will never be able to be determined by the authorities because there is no precise population control in Pakistan and India. The earthquake of 8 October also had an impact in the border areas of Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and China and caused deaths, but this is being concealed for whatever reasons. I have not yet explored what the winter will bring in terms of new misery and hardship, and many deaths in the affected areas, but the number of deaths will be very high. Governments are also to blame for this, because they are not evacuating the people living in misery and distress and moving them to the warmer south and providing them with decent care. What is being done in the earthquake areas is only emergency action, which is almost fruitless, because there are too many humans in need of help, several million. Real aid would only be an evacuation to the south, and there a reasonable and humane supply. But many of those in need are to blame for their own fate to come, because although they would have the possibility to move to the south, they stubbornly refuse.
Typical, but cannot be changed. The next things are actually short questions, but answering them will take some time in terms of a more precise execution, if confirmed. First, I have a question regarding the private conversations Simya Se Ketzel you and all the others had with me. Were and are these always recorded by you?
Also, all purely private conversations between you and us have been and will be recorded verbatim, but strictly personal matters are only accessible to those to whom they belong.
Is it then possible that I may be able to obtain the data from a particular private conversation and insert it into our current conversation as well?
If it does not violate privacy, What is it about?
It is an assassination attempt on my life, and it is one I have not recorded. We would like to complete the brochure Assassinations and the data in Guido's book, which we want to republish.
You are talking about the 8th of June, 1982, if I am not mistaken.
Yes.
I can retrieve the data here. Here I have all the data if you want to read.
Sure.
Look, this is the list. Yes, here. It was on the 8th of June, 1982. You had a private conversation with Ketzel. I remember that well because he told me everything. You talked about it privately because you did not want the group to know about it then. The reason was you wanted to protect HJ, who due to his confusion wanted to kill you.
Yeah, I know, and I still do. I am only interested in having the conversation between Ketzel and me at the time to record the attack. It does not have to be the whole conversation, just the one that relates to the attempted murder.
But in it is the name you wanted to protect and still do.
I will just leave that name out. Pünktchen, you know.
Of course I understand. But different group members can still add up 1 and 1, as you sometimes say.
I simply will not comment on the assumptions.
As you wish. Then we have to get into my flying machine. Because the conversation at that time between you and Quetzal I can only retrieve from there and then save it to a device, which I will leave here for you to write it down.
Is it written in German?
It is not written, it is a voice recording, and you have to copy it word by word.
Oh, good, even if it is going to be a little tedious. But thank you very much. I will add the transcript at the end of this conversation. That was then also everything. So I have no more questions.
Then we can still talk in my flying apparatus, after which I...
Okay, then let us go up.
102nd Private Contact Tuesday, the 8th of June, 1982, 21:14 hours. Excerpt from a conversation.
In fact, at your request, I have been able to find out in the last few hours what's behind today's assassination attempt, and with regard to the one against you 3 days ago, I could not find out anything. When you telepathically called me this morning, I was unfortunately very busy and indispensable at the moment, but I was able to devote myself to the 2 incidents in the afternoon, and I noticed very unpleasant things. But let me first hear what exactly happened in the early hours of the morning, for you have given me only meager information.
If you mean, it was this morning when I left my office and left the door open to go outside and check on things. It was about 4:45 ORs. First I went up to the garage, then up to the Simyase tree, where I took another look at the hole in the tree that was created by the shot at me a few days ago on the 6th of June, when Ferdinand Pfeifenberger peeled the projectile out of the tree. Then I walked around the shed and wanted to cross the parking lot to the main house to get my 2 usual hours of sleep, because the morning was already dawning. I just looked at the wristwatch. It was 5:03 hours, and walked past the place where Manara had landed on the parking lot on the 23rd of November 1977, when another lightning pain hit my back, causing me, as usual, to jerk. At the same moment I heard a loud bang from the rear western corner of the main house, and at the same moment, because I was automatically looking there, I saw a dark figure disappear. According to the bang, it was probably a small caliber rifle, and the bullet must have hit the ground somewhere behind the fairy tale pond. Of course, I immediately grabbed my pistol, which I had been carrying with me again since the attack 3 days ago, rushed off to the corner of the house, and of course found no one else. Strangely enough, the figure scurrying away seemed quite familiar to me, and I thought I had recognized it, which is why I did not tell anyone about the matter. This was also because I simply did not want to believe it, which was also the reason why I searched the area for another quarter of an hour, perhaps to find something after all, but without success. Then I went back to my office, laid down on the couch, and slept until 7:40 hours. When I woke up, I called you and briefly reported back with the request whether you could clarify what happened this morning, and also what happened 3 days ago. That was what happened.
The attack on you 3 days ago I could unfortunately not clarify, because the swinging wave of the person who shot at you apparently disappeared without trace immediately after the event from the corner of the house, just as if it had been radiated away. This leaves us with only one assumption, and that is that of the men in black, the hateful little group of Syrians. But you should keep quiet about them until such time as we ourselves will talk about it openly. As far as this morning's attack on your life is concerned, I must confirm your suspicion after my detailed investigations and a corresponding review. So there is no doubt that you recognized. At the corner of the house when you ran away after you had been shot.
But why did he do it? Do you have any idea? Does his pathological religiosity play a role?
He is possessed by the obsession that you are in league with the devil and that he has to take you to him in order to deliver the world from you and Satan.
As we did in Hinwil. He is a poor, religiously lost man, for whom any help and understanding is probably hopeless. He is to be pitied.
His religious aberration was also the reason he had to abandon his priesthood.
I guess it is that he cannot see the bigger picture and take responsibility for his actions. So it is probably best to let the matter rest and not make it public. And if there should be open talk about it, then his name should not be mentioned.
He will no longer act against you, for I have determined that the attack on you was an act of desperation due to his fear in religious confusion. The act has taken all his strength, so he will not make another attempt. Besides, I have also clarified that he will only be able to live for a little more than 6 years.
That is, after all, not to be desired. But let us leave it, because it would not help to report him to the police and cause a fuss. Somehow he is a poor guy, whom I like in spite of everything, even if he wanted to get at my heels today. But I have been thinking about other things that I would like to talk to you about.